Hey guys, how you doing? Storyhawk here again, reading some more revenge stories. Let's get right into it. Fire me before I quit, I ruin your life. So since I'm still in school, I took a job at a bakery of types, which I won't name. The place has bread in the name, but also sells overpriced salads and sandwiches. I worked there for close to a year, where I had this boss named Betty. Not her real name, of course. Betty and I didn't get along whatsoever. She had gotten the previous general manager to quit because she had an affair with him, and she threatened to tell his wife if he didn't leave. He quickly left the job and she was promoted to the position. I didn't like her, but I have to respect the dedication to be the general manager of a small-ass store. When I first started working there, I was respectful, but she would do things that would get on my nerves. For instance, I would clean all the places I'd be hired to do, and once I was done and relaxed for maybe 5 minutes, she would run out of the manager's office screeching, "Why aren't you working?" I would tell her, of course, I did my job, and as a cashier, if nobody is there to help, then I didn't have anything to do. She would glare at me. Then I would see her accidentally drop an entire pot of brewed coffee onto my freshly mopped floor for me to clean. So I learned quickly to always look busy. Once she realised I was going to kneel and kiss the ground she walked on, she started dropping my hours. The store ran on a Game of Thrones type politics for who gets promotions and raises. Somehow all her friends were managers and would bully the rest of us. She was barely at work. She would drive to my job and clock in just in case corporate decided to check her hours. So she was essentially stealing hours. When you clocked in, it printed out a small piece of paper telling you when you clocked in. She would just drop them on the floor for me to clean up. I would usually pick them up and stick them into a pocket. So this led to me finding Betty's clock in and out stubs in my pocket at my house. This will be important for later. Did I mention she was super racist? She was white, and most of the staff were my fellow high school peers, who were mostly people of colour. One day at work she walked out and told us, "When you're on the clock, I own you." When we all reacted to look at her, she backpedaled and was like, "I didn't mean it like that." This will be important for later. So after a while I got sick of practically begging for hours, so I went to my current job, but decided I merely wanted to drop my hours. We were already barely a day a week. But suddenly, when I got my new job, she scheduled me every single day of an entire week. She never did that, even when we were on semi-good terms. So I obviously told her I had a new job and I couldn't do this. After that, I went home and called my friend who was still working there to tell him I was going to quit tomorrow. He has a bad habit of putting his phone on speaker when he's cleaning at work, so Betty overheard this, obviously. The next day, I walk in and go through the respectful motions of saying, "Thank you for the opportunity," and blah blah blah. Betty let me go through the entire speech before she said, "Oh yeah, I was meaning to tell you, you're fired." I was so blindsided and pissed I cussed her out. My mum raised me to treat women with respect, but this fucking fat, overweight, hippo-looking bitch pissed me the fuck off. She's the type of girl to think binge eating was a personality trait. So I left, and was mad about being fired before I could quit, but I didn't push the issue. I'm only 18 and I already had another job. I wasn't expecting Betty to give me a good reference anyway. I would have completely left it alone if it wasn't for the district manager Ben, not real name, texting me. The revenge. He thought I was still working there, so I explained to him that I was fired. He was stunned due to the fact that I was a decent employee. He asked why she let me go and I explained it to him and he was angry. He clarified that she fired me before I quit and I said yes. He was pissed that she did this and asked if there was anything else she might have done. I kinda just vented to him for a bit. And when I told him about the racist remark, he asked if anyone else would collaborate with me. I forgot to mention that she slowly fired and forced people to quit and replaced them with her friends and family, which according to company policy she could not do. Something about conflict of interest. I asked all the people who were working that day if they could, and a few said they would say they did, but one did even better. My one co-worker Andy is convinced he's the next big vlogger, so he always has his phone out or just using audio recording for hours for a chance to catch a funny clip. I've watched his content and let me just say it's super cringe. But turns out he labels each recording by the day and times. So when he checked, he found her making racist remarks. I got a brilliant idea, and with my other fired or co-workers forced to quit, we decided to scour Andy's recordings. We found some great moments of Betty saying controversial things or just being nasty. Like once, a guest sneezed on the baked pastries and when a co-worker told her, she laughed it off and said nobody would know. But this wasn't enough for me. I try to avoid conflict, but when I'm in a situation I'll follow it through. I looked her up on Facebook and found out she was married. Nobody knew this. So when she had the affair with the other manager and basically blackmailed him, she was also married and cheating. I don't think anyone ever cared enough to find out because she was just a nasty old lady. So I found the old manager's Mark's Facebook and found out he and his wife were separated. Turns out even after he quit, Betty was still trying to blackmail money out of him. When he didn't, she told his wife anyway, causing his wife to divorce him and basically leave him to go back and live with his parents. I did some research, and in my state, blackmail or extortion is a third-degree penalty, which has a max of 7 years in prison with a fine over $10,000 to the victim. So I told the old manager what my plan was for her. He agreed to call the cops on her, but I asked if he'd wait until I finished my part first. He said he'd give me a week. So I met with District Manager Ben and showed him all our evidence, the recordings and the written statements from my other ex-co-workers and people who were still working there. I also gave Ben the slips of paper when Betty clocked in, and then left and returned 8 to 10 hours later to clock out. Ben thanked me for the information, and then I left. A few days later, while walking past the store, I noticed it was closed in the middle of the day. I texted a guy who still worked there and he told me everything. Turns out, Ben first checked the security cameras to see if she was there for the full time she claimed to be. Big surprise, she wasn't. So, Ben decided to investigate the store's expenses, since if she's lying about her time, what else could she be stealing? He found out she was stealing money from the store. The guy didn't fully explain how she was, but just that she was. Turns out she was breaking a lot of health and safety codes and used the money for repairs and etc. for herself. So she was fired immediately, along with all of her minions, and that left barely anybody to run the store. They shut down to clean up the store and fix things she didn't make. So she's out of a job, and Mark told her husband, with photo proof, granny nudes I know, that she cheated on him. But Mark phrased it so it seemed like she still was. So Betty's husband flips out and decides to divorce her, and Betty is the type to post everything on Facebook. So she's begging someone to let her stay, but all of her friends and family totally bailed on her. So she was living in her car looking for a job. That's when Mark decides to sue her for extortion. So she scrambles to find a lawyer, and to make it even worse, the company decided to sue her for all the money she stole, and plus all the repairs and lost revenue while the store is closed. Betty's life is shit. She had to sell her car for drastically under what it's worth to pay for all the legal trouble. Mark told me bits and pieces of her crying in the courtroom, but not too much. I was never super close with him. Last I heard of Betty is she's living with her sister, who definitely hates her. To think she would have avoided all this if she just let me quit. Height approved. So I originally posted this in r/malicious compliance, but I think it belongs here too. This isn't my story, but my parents'. It was probably the first time I witnessed malicious compliance, and I still remember it well. It was about 25 years ago, so I was about 8, and we had just moved into a 150-year-old house that was in need of major repairs. My dad, thinking ahead, knew he would need a large garage or workshop to really get started on the renovations properly. On the edge of our yard was an ancient barn that was falling apart and needed to be torn down. My dad figured this was the best place to build his new workshop, so that was the plan. We had met and were on good terms with all the neighbours at that point. When the plans for the new workshop were finished, my parents went around to all the neighbours as a courtesy to show them the plans and get their blessings. The neighbours whose property the current barn and new workshop would border, I'll call them the Peters, were concerned about the height. The existing barn was 16 foot high, and they asked if we could only build it 1 story, 12 foot max, as to not block the sun in their yard. Sure, no problem, my parents agreed. They wanted to go 2 stories for extra storage, but just 1 wasn't a deal breaker. So the old barn was torn down and the foundation laid for the new one. During that time, there was a falling out with the Peters and my parents. I'm not sure what happened, but it turned nasty. One day, my brother and I were playing street hockey and Mr. Peters came out yelling at us, "Get off the road, you half-breed shits!" My dad is black, so we're both half-black. "You have to earn your place in this town!" Upon hearing this, my mum had to physically restrain my dad from going over and beating the living shit out of him. Eventually he cooled off and started on his plan. The plans for 1 story went out the window. Soon, the new garage that was only supposed to be 1 story soon gained a 2nd in the blueprints. If they were going to direct racist comments at his kids, my dad would build what he wanted. As construction started, the Peters came over to ask why there was 2 stories being built, and were told to go fuck themselves. We didn't hear from them again until the roofs started to go on. The bylaws of the township limited all outstructures to 24 feet high. The Peters called the township and then a building inspector, claiming that the new garage was over 24 feet high. If it was overheight, the entire thing would have to be torn down and rebuilt, costing us tens of thousands of dollars. I remember the Peters standing there, watching the inspector with smug looks on their faces. 2 days later, we got the final report back from the township and inspector. 23 feet, 11 inches. Just as my dad had drawn up in his new plans. He set me up on the roof of the garage, just plywood, no singles yet, with some spray paint, and had me write 23 feet, 11 inches. Height approved, in 2-foot high neon orange letters across the entire roof, facing their yard and house. Not only did the garage block all the sunlight from reaching their yard, but my dad waited until everything else was done before he shingled that side of the roof. They had to stare at those neon orange letters for almost 3 years. We didn't hear a peep from them for the next 10 years until they moved. Hey guys, thanks for dropping by again. Hope you enjoyed those. Make sure you hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one. Cheers.